Good day, everyone. My name is Rebecca Lilly for the International Association for Energy Economics. It gives me great pleasure to welcome you to today's webinar entitled Careers in Data, Energy, and Economics. We are grateful to our moderator, Dr. Isabella Ruble from the U.S. Department of Energy, and our distinguished panelists for today's timely discussion. First, a little bit about the International Association for Energy Economics. We are the largest association specializing in the field of energy economics and provide a forum for the exchange of ideas, experience, and issues among professionals interested in the field. The organization produces 2 professional journals, a newsletter, and holds conferences and virtual presentations, along with a host of other products and services that you can find at our website at www.iaee.org. If you're not already a member of the association, we welcome you to join. A few housekeeping matters in regard to today's webinar before I hand things over to our moderator. First, this webinar is being recorded for those that cannot participate in today's live event. If you have questions for the panelists, please click the Q&A button at the bottom of the Zoom window and type your question. We have allocated sufficient time at the end of the webinar to address mix and policy. Isabella currently works at the U.S. Department in Washington. She is also the CEO of an innovative new startup providing specialized graduate degrees in data analytics, economics, and sustainable energy. Isabella, over to you.
Thank you, and good morning to our audience in the US, and good afternoon to our audience in Europe and the Middle East. I'm very excited to host this webinar for IAE today in Careers in Data, Energy, and Economics. Energy is what keeps our economy going. Energy abundance or the lack of energy, energy prices, environmental impacts of various forms of energy, energy transitions are all factors that can have strong real-life economic and social effects on individuals and countries. The recent developments on the international scene are a further reminder of this. As the energy system and the industry develops, the collection, manipulation, and interpretation of data become more and more important. And I'm very excited now to introduce today's panel of amazing speakers. Our first speaker is Madeline Jowdy. She is a senior director and senior consultant on FTI's North American Energy Market Modeling and Economic Impact Analysis team. And we have Jessica Lin, who is a group product manager at Oracle Utilities. Jessica Lin is the leader of the data engineering team. We also have Dr. Dean Foreman. Dr. Dean Foreman is the chief economist of the American Petroleum Institute and an expert in the economics and markets for oil, natural gas, and power. Last but not least, we have Matt Kolesar, who is the chief environmental scientist at ExxonMobil. In that role, he leads global advocacy and issue management of methane and flaring, and all of our panelists are going to tell you more about themselves right now. Thanks. Please go ahead. Madeline, would you like to start?
Well, yes, I certainly would. Thank you, Isabella, and thank you very much for the opportunity to be here. I guess first I'd like to share how I met Isabella. We met, gosh, it was maybe what, 10 years ago at an International Association of Energy Economics meeting, or maybe it was the US Association, I don't remember. Anyway, it was in Washington, DC, and I was giving a talk, oh no, it wasn't 10 years ago. I was giving a talk on the impact of US LNG imports on global markets. And as part of that association meeting, we did a tour of a fracking site in North Virginia. Anyway, fast forward to today, I think the US is still playing a central role in energy markets, particularly in gas markets, and I'm very happy to be associated with that in some way. I'm a consultant with FTI Consulting, and I have been in this role for about a year, and I I like the consulting world. It's very different from my previous roles. Previously, I was in more a market analytics role, looking at global LNG markets and forecasting prices. And so it's nice to have the opportunity to take that knowledge and then bridge help in some way move from LNG to energy transition markets. And that's what I'm doing in my current role.
Thank you, Madeline. Jessica, you would like to go next?
Sure. Thank you, Madeline and Isabella. I'm also very glad to be here today. And as Isabella mentioned, I'm a group product manager for the data engineering teams of Oracle Energy and Water. We recently rebranded ourselves to Oracle Energy and Water as we continue to expand the offerings for our utility clients. In particular, I've been in this position for about 4 years. Before this, I actually started in strategy before moving into product. However, our responsibilities on the platform are to provide the architecture and the tools to leverage our clients' data to improve the success of our energy efficiency products. Before I was here at Oracle, I worked with Isabella at the Department of Energy. My office was just right next to hers. I was leading teams of data scientists there. And before that, I spent nearly a decade at the World Bank Group, focused on what role they could play to commercialize clean energy technologies. I started my career in the private sector in finance and venture capital. I'm an engineer by training, having studied electrical engineering and computer science at MIT, and received my master's in public policy, where I had a fellowship for social entrepreneurship after selling a small wireless mesh technology startup.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Who would like to go next? Matt, would you like to go ahead?
Sure, I'll go next. Hi, good afternoon. Matt Kolesar with ExxonMobil, Chief Environmental Scientist. I'll just start with, I'm a chemical engineer from the proud University of Akron. I've been in this role about a year, but I've been doing sustainability related work almost my entire career. It's been a passion of mine, both professionally and personally. And I would say it's sort of a perfect fit for this discussion today. It's really a mix of the underlying science and math and trying to shape the policy around the energy transition. And I'll just note, I know my bio seems to focus more on climate and greenhouse gas, but certainly the energy transition is going to be much more dramatic than that on water use, land use, just transition, socioeconomic. So I get to play a part in all that. And I will say that data, while in the Sunday morning talk shows we hear a lot about policy, I will say data and math and science underpins all of that.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Dean, would you like to go ahead?
Sure. So, PhD in economics from the University of Florida, and I started out more in regulatory economics and a lot on econometrics, and I became a forecaster in telecommunications. That was my first job out of grad school. And I was in telecom with AT&T and Verizon for 7 years before I went to ExxonMobil in 2002. So for 20 years now, I've been in oil and gas. And the interesting thing, and I'm happy to take questions on this, but it's really about the analytical skills, how you apply them, how you learn and go deep enough in the industry context to make something of them. And the interesting thing, I think, for me in a career standpoint is if you start, especially with a PhD in economics, there's always a bent to kind of push you into you're the quantitative person. And if your interest is in policy, in communications, in connecting the dots and being able to speak on behalf of an industry. As the chief economist of the American Petroleum Institute, we are an advocacy organization for the natural gas and oil industry. Historically, for 100 years, have been a standard-setting organization. And in my role, we're also a primary data source. We survey up to 90% of the industry every week and publish reports on the spaces. So to me, it's a wealth of data. It's a wealth of information. It's the ability to apply analytics and advanced econometrics, and frankly, to put it all together in a way that is always intellectually interesting. At the same time, it's also important, and especially with recent world events, extremely important. So love to take questions on any or all of that. Thank you.
Thanks, Dean. Thanks. That's some great insights, and you're right at the source. You get the data, the hot data, so to speak, that many people must be jealous about. What about what the industry is like at the moment? Especially currently with everything that's going on with the energy transition and the political events around the world, right? You wonder, how does oil react? Will they invest more? Will they bring up more oil tomorrow in 24 hours or not? And stuff like that. So in order not to get too serious right away, can each of you tell me a fun fact about yourself that you think is fun, at least? Let's start with Madeline again, if you want.
Okay, well, I think the most fun fact is that I'm wearing cowboy boots. But second to that, Dean, you made me think of this. I have a degree in economics. I always wanted to work for an oil company, always, like from the time I was a little girl, because I grew up in Saudi Arabia. But the fun fact about me is that I actually spent 10 years in the fashion business before I got serious about my energy career. And in that role, I was a producer for print and video media. And I would say my main takeaway, sort of looking back now that I'm in a consulting role, is that I actually had no interest in fashion whatsoever. But I had the opportunity to manage large projects because everyone in fashion is either creative or into something else. No one wants to sit there and do the budgeting and make presentations to senior management about how they need money for this location or that model, and nobody wants to really do the logistics end. So that's the fun fact.
That is really funny, and actually it shows us that how careers change along in your life, like how you change careers. You don't necessarily, your first job is not necessarily the one where you end up and you find your passion. You don't find your passion right away. I would say that's my lesson from what I heard from you right now. Jessica, would you like to go next?
Sure. Well, as I mentioned, I was in DC with Isabella, working at the Department of Energy, but I was actually remote in my current role before the pandemic. So I'm based in Virginia Beach, Virginia now, pretty close to the boardwalk. And some people know that I've taken up surfing as a hobby since the pandemic started. I've always been looking for outdoor activities to do, but I don't know if they know that I actually learned by taking lessons with my son in his surf camp. I wasn't the only mom, there were two of us. I was probably the tallest in the class, but if there's a lesson to be learned, it's that I guess you can always learn new skills.
Yeah, you have a lot of courage. I think I would be scared of that at this point. I would chicken out. But yeah, my son is 23, so he doesn't want me to surf with him anymore. So it's good that you took advantage. Matt, would you like to go ahead?
Sure, I'll build off Madeline's comments. I did not have any insights or interest in being in the energy industry. I honestly didn't even know I wanted to be a chemical engineer. I took, the personality test as a senior in high school. And it said, spit out chemical engineer. And I said, well, that sounds very interesting. But I will say where I ended up, I think, is somewhat cosmic destiny. I actually started my career with Goodyear Tire and Rubber in Akron, Ohio, their corporate headquarters. And I've been told my last name is Slovakian and it translates to wheel maker. And so I think Goodyear was part of my destiny. And just along with that, when my ancestors moved from Slovakia in the 1870s, they settled in a town called Oil City, Pennsylvania. So I don't really think I had any choice but to end up here with an energy company and start with a tire company. So that's my fun fact.
Yeah, your fate was predetermined.
Yes.
Okay, Dean, would you like to go ahead? This is more fun than I thought.
When I was a sophomore at university, I was in the honors college at the University of South Carolina, and I spent the first half of that in a United Nations program in New York City. And it was all about connecting global and local communities. And at the time, I had an economics course there, took seminars at the UN. My sense of it was I wasn't I was an engineering major at that point. I really wasn't interested in economics, but I had one professor that after the semester pulled me aside and said, you know, I think you'd be good at this. And I didn't, I was like, thank you. I didn't really do anything with it. But 2 years later, when I actually did decide to change majors, you know, just a professor here and there, getting some good advice and getting a steer in the right direction and realizing what you're good at and what you like. Yeah, those things come together. So that semester in New York kind of changed the course of my life and my career. And I hope there's something, you know, for our audience that's something like that.
Yeah, that's very, very interesting. Yeah, indeed. So next, does anybody want to say something about their company or their current role? And yeah, and tell us a little bit about what your work looks like these days. And actually, I want to make one more point before we move on to what Dean said. Dean talked about being an engineer and being told that he would be good in economics. So that's something very interesting to me personally, because I taught for 17 years and I also taught in a master's program in the mechanical engineering program and in a energy studies program, which the energy studies program was interdisciplinary. And so I had a lot of engineering students. And to my surprise, because they're very technical, right? They had very little understanding of economics, maybe none, most of them. So your professor who discovered that you would be a talent in economics is you know, did a great job, because I think it's not always easy to bridge that gap between engineering and thinking just like an engineer, or, you know, starting to think like an economist. Also, my work when I worked overseas for Europe Aid, at some point I worked at the Ministry of Energy in Lebanon for a consulting project. And it's funny, all these engineers working on energy issues to establish the Center for Energy Conservation there had no basic economics. And so that revealed itself during the project as something really, really important to bring in. So your point is really like talking to me. So yeah, so who wants to go ahead and say a little bit about their company or their daily work or something like that? Madeline, do you want to start again?
Yeah, certainly. There's a lot going through my head, but you know, before I talk about or say something about what I'm doing now, because I know this is a panel on careers and energy, I just wanted to you know, something that Dean said struck me when you know, like I said, I always wanted to work for an oil company, and I knew I wasn't going to be a petroleum geologist or an engineer. Like that was not going to happen. But as you know, as I was in college, I was majoring in political science and doing all the international affairs and all of that. And at some point, I think in my sophomore year in college, I met a senior who was an economics major, and I thought she was really cool. And I kind of, you know, as one does, I sort of took stock of my life and my interests. And I thought, you know, I love history, I love literature, but you know, I'm here in college. My parents are paying all this money for this degree, and I need to do something that is going to take me way outside of my comfort zone and maybe give me some practical skills that like I would never, you know, I'm not going to pick up an economics textbook in my free time. And so I decided to major in economics, and it was a real struggle for me. It was not, you know, price theory and income theory. I mean, I barely passed those classes, and I really, you know, I really struggled. But, you know, when I came out of American University, I felt like I had a whole new understanding of the world that, you know, I was never going to get from reading political science textbooks, and just sort of a whole new dimension to how the world works. So, yeah, I guess I'll leave it at that for now.
That's very interesting. I'm not a panelist, but I have to comment on that one because it was exactly the reverse for me. And I used to watch my grandfather, who had Hayek and Mises as his teachers at the Vienna University, watching at the time of Reagan the TV and commenting on economics. And I always wanted to understand the world, and that motivated me to study economics, right? But I also disliked politics. So I said, I will study economics because, this is scientific, this is research, all this political stuff, that's not real. And I went the long way back to everything is determined by politics. So okay, we can move on, please. Jessica, go ahead.
Sure, thank you. I guess I'm going to pull us back maybe and talk a little bit about what my company does, just because it's, I feel a little bit like the odd man out. I'm here at Oracle Energy and Water, but I actually work for OPower, which founded the behavioral energy efficiency industry. So about 10 years ago, after the California blackouts, there was a behavioral scientist, Professor Cialdini, who conducted an experiment to understand what kind of messaging could lead to decreasing energy use. And he found that the only statistically significant behavior change came from messaging that it wasn't that you could save energy or that you could save the planet or even that you could save money, but that your neighbors were doing better than you were. So we actually came up with this normative comparison as the basis. We developed a proprietary algorithm for this normative comparison, rather, and that's the basis of comparing your energy.
Jessica, I think you're muted.
Oh my goodness.
You muted yourself while you were talking. Do you hear? I don't hear her.
No?
You sound fine. I can hear you.
All right. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, okay, sorry about that. Where did I cut out? Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Oh, perfect. Okay. So please excuse me. I was just mentioning that we, through the use of randomized controlled trials, we were able to test the difference between how much our customers were actually saving, which is in general 1.5 to 2.5% per household, but over a service territory of 1 million people, they could sell this to their regulatory commission. So I guess this does have to get back to the regulatory environment. But today we've saved over 33 terawatt hours of savings, so equivalent to like the Hoover Dam, or 22 billion pounds of coal saved over the years that we've been in business. So just to say that, this idea that you can use data to calculate the amount of savings is extremely important to what we do, and the basis of what I do in terms of our data engineering teams. We've since then, of course, expanded our product lines from home energy reports to outbound communications and web as well. But, I've been very focused on how to send the right message to the right customer at the right time. So a product manager is a relatively nascent industry in comparison to our engineering teams, let's say. And we wear a number of different hats, but I've enjoyed that sort of being able to think through both the technical, the regulatory, even the go-to-market components of this role.
Can you say a little bit more about the different roles?
Sure, I just meant that product managers in general wear a number of different hats. So officially, we're the ones who are responsible for like the strategy behind the product, right? So there's a strategic lens to it. If we're going to create a new product, what is the trends that are happening that we think would drive it? For example, where Netflix is making it such that customers want hyper-personalization, right? So I have to make sure that I have enough data in my stores to be able to send the right message to the right customers and create those features with my engineering team. So I also have to play a technical role. Does the system design, will this be performant? But once we create the product, I have to work with sales and say, how do we get it out to our customers? So in that regard, on any given day, we play a number of different roles for the products that we lead.
That's very interesting. Thank you. Indeed, yes. I understood much better. Good, great. So Matt, would you want to go ahead?
Yeah, sure. So I suspect most people have heard of ExxonMobil. We're branded as Exxon and Mobil at fueling stations, or Esso outside the United States. And so I suspect most people know us from that perspective, but we also certainly one of the world's largest energy companies, oil producer, natural gas producer, which has been a sort of important topic recently, one of the largest in the world. But we also have a significant petrochemical business, so butyl rubber, plastics for our cars and our clothing and cosmetics, and isopropyl alcohol, which was also pretty important over the last couple of years, comes out of our chemical processes. And so Again, we've talked about the energy transition and the value of energy, but it's really multi-dimensional and really a sort of a kid in a candy store as far as a scientist or engineer on the amount of data, anywhere from how do I provide affordable energy to parts of the world that don't have access, how do I provide it cleaner and with a lower carbon footprint, all the way to, again, since we're in the petrochemical businesses, how do we do better as an industry with recycling of plastics? And so, you know, there's all new processes, and how do we influence consumer behavior, and how do we do that more cost effectively and cleaner? So really, there's no end to opportunities that a scientist or engineer at ExxonMobil has, you know, to participate in sort of enhancing the consumer experience.
Are there big differences in the petrochemical environmental impact around the different petrochemical sectors around the world, or is the technology pretty much standard? I mean, is the production in the US, for example, and Europe much cleaner than the production in developing countries, or is the process different?
It's pretty consistent from an energy intensity or air emissions. I think where some of the nuances are, depending on where we are in the world on the water availability, clean water availability, land use. Certainly every region has their own expectations on what's important to them. And we certainly respect that and meet those obligations. And as an international company, it's become a little more consistent, but when we go back 30, 40 years, it was important for us to have internal standards to say, even if I go to a part of the world that may not have advanced environmental protections like in North America or Europe, we're going to bring those expectations with us because we know that's the right thing to do.
Thank you. Dean, would you like to say something, or should we go on to the career path again?
Either way, I'm happy to introduce the role in context with the organization just a little bit. And I mentioned that we're a standard setting organization and advocacy on behalf of the natural gas and oil industry. So we are the trade association that's the largest in the US, representing all segments of the industry. So some nearly 600 member companies across the entire value chain. And in my role, part of it is processing the reports and the data and managing to get all of that together in a cogent way. A big part of it is public speaking, media work, and making sure that we're projecting this in an appropriate way. And this isn't putting spin on it, it's grounding to truth what the data are actually saying and making sure that people understand, especially in this environment, what's actually happening. So for example, over the last year, we've had primary data that have shown that demand for oil and gas would be coming back along with the economy. But the supply side was lagging. And we went into detail about why that was the case before Russia, Ukraine, and here we are. So a lot of these things, it's interesting in that it pulls together all of true business economics and a National Association of Business Economics sense of looking at economic indicators, reading the tea leaves on what's happening, but also grounding this through the entire value chain and what's really happening across not just oil and gas, but in context with all energy competing in the power sector, energy transition issues, emissions issues, advocating, helping the policy departments. As an advocacy organization, API is structured where we have departments that focus on state and federal policy for upstream, downstream, midstream, across different segments of the industry. So the fact that this is sort of a nerve center in that we're partnering with all of those, using the data, communicating externally at the same time that we're providing a lot of direct support for policy analysis. So I think it's fascinating, and it's combined everything I've ever learned in my entire career.
Thank you. Thanks, Dean. That's indeed very interesting and fascinating. So would you like to share a little bit each about your daily work, what it looks like to help, or also what would the role, talking a little bit about your own role, but also maybe what would a young person who just starts out in their career be faced with, for example, in a role similar to yours, of course not at your level because they are starting, or in your company, depending on how you want to frame it, right? Would you like to go ahead, Madeline? What are the skills you're looking for? What you know, these kind of things.
Yeah, sure. Consulting it's an interesting field. I mean, I found, like I said, I've been with FTI for just about a year, and I found there's two kinds of consultants, and just talking to other consultants, you know, there's some that come right out of school, and at FTI we have a rotational program where consultants go into the different segments of the business and learn about it. I'm in the economic consulting practice, and we have a rotational program that focuses on, you know, people with careers, or not careers, but with degrees in finance and economic and data analytics. You know, that's kind of one type of consultants going in and doing these rotational programs, and they have, you know, a particular skill set that they can offer. And then the other kind of consultant I would fall into that bucket is someone who has a long, you know, a long time energy experience, either with an oil company or even an engineering firm. We have a lot of senior level consultants who are from engineering firms, or who have extensive market knowledge and contacts, and they come in and they're, you know, expected to bring in business and contacts and sort of like a deep market understanding. So I can, you know, in terms of, you know, starting out your career in consulting, I can't really, you know, advise on that. I will say I started out my career, as I said, I really wanted to work in the energy business. I had a degree in economics and this sort of 10-year hiatus in fashion. And so my the initial job, the first job that I could get was working for the trade press. So working for an oil and gas reporting company, and just the first job that was available was, you know, LNG correspondent. You know, it was sort of a new growing field back in, 2001. And it was looking like the US was going to need to import significant amounts of natural gas in order to keep the lights on and people's houses warm. And with that, you know, in that role, I thought, okay, you know, I thought I'd do oil in the Middle East, but, you know, LNG in Asia and learning about the Asian markets, sure, you know, why not? And with that trade, you know, with that industry exposure, just from being a reporter and being able to pick up the phone, or maybe not being able to have my phone calls answered, but, you know, picking up the phone and just talking to everybody in the business and, you know, looking at the data and the numbers. And, you know, like Dean says, you know, he's looking at data and presenting a story. And, you know, I was able to look at data and challenge the stories that people were telling, or just look at the trends using my economic backgrounds and say, hey, that doesn't sound right, or that doesn't make sense. But in any case, that understanding of the LNG business, particularly the Asian customers that were consuming most of the world's LNG at the time, and even, you know, there's been a little disruption, shall we say, in Europe, where the demand there is competing strongly with demand in Asia. But that enabled me to go to a sort of a non-traditional consulting firm called Pyra Energy, where we really, the focus of Pyra was building out supply-demand balances for all kinds of commodities, so oil, gas, coal, petrochemicals, you know, different commodities. I was brought in there to build the LNG practice and set up the balance for the supply-demand balance and price forecasting for LNG, and that ultimately brought me to FTI, where I'm doing, I would say, and then now I'm going to skip ahead to what, you know, at my level, what are sort of the three components of consulting, at least, you know, where I sit, and this could apply to a junior level person as well. But, you know, one component is the data analytics. So being able to do the work, really do the analytical work, either if it's finding the data, analyzing the data, forecasting, manipulating the data, cleaning it, whatever your role is. So that's one part of it. The other part of it is project management. So, you know, managing projects, managing data analysts, managing market modelers, managing, other divisions in the company that may be providing certain skills that your particular group may be missing. And then the third part of consulting is, at least at the more senior level, is business development. So bringing in business, and that's, I would say for me, that's been a real challenge in this role, because I came in thinking like, oh, I know all these people in the LNG business. I know all about the LNG business. I can tell you anything about what's driving demand. I can tell you about supplies. I can tell you about the political relationships between countries and how all this is happening. And it was actually just last week I was talking to the senior partner in this group, and he just looked at me and he said, it's not all about what you know. He's like, it has nothing to do with that. It has to do with, understanding your particular clients and understanding what their pain points are, and, taking your knowledge of the market and being able to say, okay, I know these things, but, here's how this impacts you specifically. And, here's how I can help. And I think these are things that even, coming out of graduate school or undergraduate, or even, a few years into your career, are kind of important to, keep in your mind as you're sort of evaluating new opportunities or looking at challenges in your current company. Sort of think in terms of those three buckets.
Yeah, that's very insightful. And you're in the right field. Gas prices, the European gas prices in the last 12 months, the main European hub increased by more than 1,000%. So you're in business. You're in business, basically, right? So Jessica, would you like to say something?
Sure. So I guess in terms of responding to this question about how, what we're looking for and what young people would see as a career ladder. We have associate PM levels, right out of grad school. Then we have product managers, and what are the skills that we're looking for? I think starting out, can you help to define the functional requirements for features? Can you define the system requirements? Where is the data stored? I should differentiate that, though. There's a sort of front-facing product manager, and I'm part of the platform teams, and the platform is responsible for making the data available to the front-facing products. And so our users are not only the utility clients or their customers, but also our internal product managers who are trying to define their product requirements as well. And I mentioned previously, and I think as you go up the ladder, the skill sets that we increasingly look at are, can you be more strategic? Can you see where the trends are, where the data is showing us, and then create new product requirements, like new product development. So I mentioned already that what we do is probably the overlap of that Venn diagram of behavior science, computer science, and data science, right? And increasingly we're thinking not only how can you save energy, full stop, but how can you save energy at specific times, with the increase of time of use rates and other specific times and locations, right? So that you can be that grid asset per se. But recently, as another example of what we mean when we say strategy, we looked at the data for US households, and we realized that even before the pandemic, over half of US households could be considered low or moderate income. Then there was the record-breaking unemployment that hit last spring. The challenge was that it was difficult to actually define energy affordability using certain metrics or certain analytics, right? But our groups have always used a portfolio of metrics to help our customers do targeting. But when we looked at some of that data, what we were able to see is that there is a need. There's actually assistance that's available, and customers simply don't have that information or know where to get it. That's a major pain point. And so we've created a new product line around energy affordability to help utilities partner, and provide the information about these programs to clients that are in need. For that, we hired a product manager who actually comes from a different background. So on the platform side, we tend to have computer science backgrounds or engineering, but we got somebody who has a background working in a cap agency, someone who has more experience with the government programs, because they bring a plethora of experience from understanding how the products work in the field. So we also look for subject matter experts for our different energy-related products as well.
That's very interesting. Yes, thanks. Matt, would you like to go ahead?
I'll just make a comment, sort of an observation sitting in my role, and I get to do a lot of mentorship for younger engineers and scientists and economists. And universally, particularly, the younger generation wants to be part of the energy transition, wants to pursue a sustainability career, regardless of sort of their degree or, initial interests. And so we just have to remind them the skills that people learned in engineering or science or as economists, those fundamental skills are still the right skills. And so even though a company like ExxonMobil is out trying to generate new markets and commercialize new energy streams like hydrogen or biofuels, the same underlying skills, the same economic analysis on what projects are viable, the same engineering skills on how to develop the manufacturing processes. So we have a lot of engineers that we hire in, and they go work at a manufacturing location like a refinery or chemical plant, and they feel like they've lost their way and that's not what they wanted to participate in. But the end of the day is a refinery somewhere in the world is ultimately likely to switch to a biofuels refinery, and we're actively pursuing that. And so those skills, that chemical engineering, mechanical engineering, electrical engineering, the economists who need to understand how to make that an attractive investment, all the same underlying skills. So I'll just leave my comments at that. And any student or recent graduate knows that what they've learned is going to be part of the solution for us.
Yes, thanks. That's very insightful. And there's many aspects to the jobs. You and Madeline and Jessica, you all mentioned different types of jobs that are all in this area of energy, economics, and data, right? And they have all different angles. So no matter what your background is, I believe you can always, I don't know what your thoughts are on this, but I believe that you can always tailor it to the energy industry. So if I studied economics, I can supplement with data maybe, or I can supplement with basic engineering like I had to do when I started to work on energy issues. I took electrical 101 basically from a colleague, not in the classroom, but still, I took the book and I studied, because you want to complement whatever skills you have to the field where you're currently working in, so that it's kind of interdisciplinary, I believe, what we have to face in the energy sector right now. You need some economic understanding, you need some basic engineering, and you need the data skills. So do you want to go ahead, Dean?
Sure. So in the interest of time, I think the phrase or advice that was offered once to me that was probably the most valuable was be a glutton for experience. And that means don't think about just moving ahead, but really think about the skills you're building and the portfolio of experience and how it weaves together into the story of whatever your individual career is. Now, my personal bent, when we hire, the things I look for, one is intellectual curiosity. Are you someone who knows how to learn and self-learn? So being able to just pick up and be a sponge for things is really important. In my own career, where I've moved around probably a dozen times, I've been an economist and a forecaster. I've been a treasurer in the upstream part of the business. I've worked as a risk manager on an ethane cracker and derivatives complex. So there are different boxes in this industry that you check between operational, headquarters and more strategic things, more on the analytics side of things, more on the public facing and communications side of things, and then domestic and international. Do you have a global view and an understanding? And so there's a part of it that's just about the data and the measurement skills. And I think everybody has to have some personal value proposition that they bring. But it's really this combination again of what you're good at and what you love doing. And if you love it, you'll be good at it. And you just need to figure out where that niche is and how it weaves together, and the rest will take care of itself.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. After having taught for 17 years, it's like always follow your passion. Even if your passion is in an area where you don't see that there's so many jobs, if you're really good about it, at it, you know, you will be the one that will do well in that area. That's what I believe, at least. And you have to be passionate. Don't go into any area that you're not passionate about. So I think now we can actually we got some questions, and we can chat a little bit more, but we can also start taking some questions here. And I have one that I will read to you.
Isabella?
Sorry?
Before we move on, could I say one other thing about this passion?
Oh, yeah, sure.
It just struck a chord with me, and so wanted to say, you know, just as young people starting out, you know, I think I studied engineering in college and when I went out, but when I was younger, I'd been raised by a single mom, and I was very focused on making money. You know, I wanted to make things easier for her, and so even though I studied electrical engineering and computer science, I went into banking. I was like, I'm going to make some money, you know. But and this is a little bit of a personal story, but you know, after I was working these arduous hours, and you know, and after my mother became ill and passed away, you know, I said to myself, like, what is the purpose of, you know, of this type of work? Am I really being impactful? And so I just did want to underscore this idea that, and it's funny because my brother on the flip side was like a musician. I was like, how are you gonna, what does that mean? But he was happy, you know, and I know this is an economics and but my mother always encouraged that, you know. And for myself too, I thought back to some of those lessons and I said, what is it that I truly enjoyed? And I enjoy this idea of thinking, you know, we have seen the correlation between economics and energy and being able to improve economics, right? And I want to be able to help in that way. And so when I stopped having my goal as, you know, sort of a materialistic one, which can fall short, and I really thought deeply about what it is that I'm motivated by, it was the money will come. So my advice to young people would be to follow your passion and that, you know, rather than a specific goal.
Yes, that's so true. And by the way, something a little bit different, but what Madeline said before about the pain point, that's what my marketing advisor told me as well. So that's a little bit of marketing in there, you know, the pain points of your client. And so also when you apply for a job, what is the pain point of your employer? Where is your value added? What are you bringing to the table to fix that? That's some of a thought that you can have during an interview as well. So that marketing part applies to a lot of things. I wanted to touch on something else. Do you want to talk about anything else here in terms of career advice or how you navigated the pandemic? And then we have a few questions after that. Just briefly, anything that changed, major change during the pandemic in your work life, or everything went smoothly?
I don't mind stepping in to say that, you know, my professional life was completely upended in the pandemic because I had, first of all, I went to a smaller consulting firm called Pyre that was, you know, pretty straightforward, supply demand balances, market forecasting, and so on. We were acquired in 2017 by SP Global Platts, which has just recently become a huge data and analytics behemoth by acquiring IHS. That just happened last week. But that was a tremendous opportunity because it was basically just a huge company that had all of these business functions. And so they had, you know, this analytics division of which I was a part of, you know, still doing my LNG thing, but it's really a commercial organization. And after Pyre was acquired by SP Global, they just sort of let me loose on kind of the market. So I was, you know, probably on an airplane most of my weeks, most of my months, was my days just traveling all over the world and giving presentations either to conferences that were sponsored by Platts or, you know, other kinds of conferences, doing market presentations to big clients. And so I was just constantly traveling. And, you know, when the pandemic hit, of course, that all came to an end. And I sort of looked around and I realized, like, wow, I'm in this sort of senior leadership role, but I'm not doing any more data or analytics. And it was kind of, and I think, I was looking at the company and they were looking at me like, well, what is she doing? Because I wasn't really doing anything except, kind of going out there and telling the story. And so it was difficult. And then, and sort of relating to what other people have said about energy transition, this was also, I think the pandemic hit at a time, even, before the pandemic hit, there was a lot of discussion about the energy transition. And I was feeling, as someone who, I have to admit, I love natural gas. I think it's great. I really do. I love it. I love the oil and gas business. And I think natural gas is an important component of how the energy market works. But there was just, in a lot of the mentorship that I was doing and a lot of the, new students who were always coming to me to talk about, careers in energy, there was just sort of a disdain for the sort of classic fossil fuel world. And so I was feeling, just very, very discouraged. And so, the pandemic was just a time for me to do a lot of soul searching and just thinking about, okay, how can I make natural gas part of the energy transition? But, what are other skills that I can learn and do? And so, coming to FTI was, the ability to do that, but it was rough.
Yeah, so I meant more like in terms of the work. So what the feedback that I got from young people around me is that when they change jobs, and also through my work with the women in technology, when they change jobs within the pandemic, or they started their first job, and even now, a lot of companies stayed remote or come in once a week or twice a week into the office. And nobody really realized what that means for people who just start out their career. So some people, for example, told me they joined a new team. They were in that company as an intern, but then when the company hired them, some projects were not coming about because of the pandemic. So the person ended up in a different department in the same company that had hired them, right? So at that department, they didn't know anybody. And people wouldn't put on their picture on Zoom. So he didn't even know what his colleagues looked like. And he was shy to put his own picture on because nobody else put theirs, put their picture on. And so, or turns their video on, I mean. And so it was very disappointing. And eventually, after like 9 months, the person found another job with another company who had handled the whole situation much better to integrate the young person into the department during the pandemic. Seeing, yes, I have colleagues. Yes, I can relate to them. I can have a chat. Because if you've never seen the person, you would not like to mention anything else, right? Like something, maybe 2-3 sentences of a personal issue, right? You would not feel comfortable. Even working with them would be weird, right? And so, and this is something that I want to just mention. If you start out somewhere and there is not a lot of contact and your colleagues don't put their video on, put your video on, start with it, just there, because that's the only way that you can motivate others to do the same. And it can be helpful. And just because you're new and you're starting out, you should not be shy about that. Because I heard that from 2-3 people who were really desperate during the pandemic, who experienced that in their company. And it seems like people at our age maybe not always think about this kind of thing, right? These young people already suffer from sometimes the imposter syndrome, right? Which is very common and which we shouldn't suffer from. They shouldn't suffer from. It's because everybody started out, right? And we all take different ways to start out. So I just want to take one question. Yes.
Maybe I could take that, Isabella, because my org was actually remote before the pandemic.
Oh, yeah.
Or I was, at least. And we had 2 offices, one in Arlington and one in San Fran. And we're even downsizing now so that if we do go back to the office, it will be more of a hybrid work. So I do think that the pandemic has fundamentally changed the way that we do business. Oracle was always a very remote environment to begin with, but OPower was less so. We definitely had more of an office culture. We even had dogs in our office. Everybody really enjoyed it. But that said, given that we are moving into this new normal where the amount of time that one spends in the office is going to be less in general terms, I do think it is important for young people to think through how to integrate into these these systems. If you don't get to see somebody at the water cooler or bump into them in the office, how can you make these connections intentionally? I think it's vitally important to seek out mentors. I think people are very open to it, but if I'm asked, I say yes, but I'm not always like seeking, so I do think it's vitally important. I think too, when you're interviewing, think through what those companies have done for their cultures in the remote environment. For example, we have happy hours where we've done everything from escape rooms to play Scribble. And it's just a time for us to spend an hour, and we're still on Zoom, but at least we're like interacting and understanding each other's humor a little bit better. In addition, I've been very lucky, I'm part of a mentor circle with our CIO, but in general, we've provided a number of different like groups, affinity groups, which may have Slack channels, but get on them and see who are the people in the org outside of your office, so you will have a team, but it's going to be your responsibility to drive your career and to make the connections throughout the organization so that if you are thinking about your next move, someone will know your name. I do think it's vitally important to make that extra effort in this remote environment.
We're getting close to the hour. We can go a little bit over it, but I just want to take this one question here. So somebody asked, would it be possible to give some direction as to what institutions, organizations should a grad student from GW, Elliott School, who is focusing on international energy affairs, oil, natural gas, LNG, who is also fluent in Russian and Ukrainian languages, be looking at? What a loaded question. Do you think that there will be a lot of new energy projects in Ukraine once the situation stabilizes? I don't know if any of us knows about energy in Ukraine and new projects. So this is a bit of a challenging question. I'm not sure.
I can give an answer that will be geography agnostic.
Okay.
And I will say there's going to be so much work to do in energy, and you pick it from transportation, right? How the policy that's going to support switching over to a different form of energy for our cars. Heavy duty trucks is going to be a whole different set of discussions, possibly a different energy source.
Oops.
Other than electric, how we heat our homes, how we get electricity to our homes.
Absolutely.
How we make cement, how we make tires, how we make cars. Those are all, we haven't figured any of that out yet. And there'll be policy, there'll be economics, there'll be science, there'll be, you name it, that underpins all that. So I don't care where you are in the world, and every country and every region is going to have its own unique approach that's bound by its talent, its resources, and its political will.
And wherever, I've lived in the Middle East for a while, and wherever you have destruction, you have to rebuild, and depending on how much of that infrastructure has been hit, you have to rebuild, and in some cases you have to modernize, you have to create it, like in Africa where not many people are on the grid. I think it's like something like 30% or something, I forget the exact percentage. There is always more to do. And also we have the energy transition, like you mentioned, which is another challenge. And yeah, so final word from our panel.
Well, just for this one individual, let's follow up offline. I mean, I think that there are two things. If you've got specialized language skills, you need to choose carefully. But anybody going into a PhD program may think they're going to do a dissertation in a certain area or study a certain area. It has to be adaptable, because to actually get the degree, it takes advocates and sponsors. You have to work with you have to adapt to the research interests of your department and your professors. And so doing research on the front end to figure out where that fit is most likely to overlap with your skills is important in choosing a program.
Yes, that was our second question. Thank you so much for answering that one. Final word? Or are we done? So as a final word, I want to thank you for joining us today. And I wish you well in your career search. And I'm handing it over to Rebecca from IAEE to close us out.
I'd like to thank Dr. Isabella Ruble and all of our distinguished panelists for an outstanding webinar. This webinar will be available on IAEE's website for future download. If you're not a member of IAEE, we encourage you to join by visiting www.iaee.org. We thank you for attending, and I officially close this webinar.